Hello class, today we're looking at some extra practice with percent equations. So in grade 8 we can deal with three types of situations, and the first one is what I call type 1, which is what is some percent of some number. And this is actually the same type of equation that we dealt with in grade 7. The only difference for grade 8 being that we can have a decimal percent or a percent over 100. So when we look at our type 1, we want to start by translating. The word what always becomes our unknown or our question mark. Is always represents an equal sign. Numbers stay the same, so 4.56 is still 4.56. Percent, we know the meaning of percent is out of 100, so that's what that translates into. And then of translates into times, and 2.3 is a number, so just 2.3. Now, whenever I'm working with an equation, just like in grade 7, I have to ask myself, is my question mark isolated? When we say isolated, we say it's by itself on one side of the equal sign. So in grade 7, sometimes I draw this wall at the equal sign to emphasize what do we mean by the left side of the wall and the right side of the wall. And when we look at our question mark, it is in fact the only thing on the left side of the wall. So yes, in this case, it is isolated. When our variable is isolated, we just need to calculate the other side. And there's two things we need to calculate over here. We need to calculate the division in this fraction, and we need to calculate the multiplication, of course, over here. So let's go ahead and do those two things. Let's start with the fraction first. Our fraction here is dividing by 100, and we know dividing by 100 moves our dot twice to the left. And so when we take our 4.56 and we divide it by 100, dividing by 100 takes the dot and moves it once, twice to the left, and so we'll have 0.0456 as the result of that division. And of course, we still have our multiply sign and our 2.3 because we haven't dealt with those yet. Now we're going to finish up by actually long multiplying those two numbers together. So we're going to take our 0.0456, we're going to multiply that by 2.3. Remember, when you long multiply decimals, you do not need to line up your dots. And now we're going to multiply each digit of the bottom by each digit of the top. So 3 times 6 is 18, or 8 carry 1. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 1 is 16, or 6 carry 1. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. And obviously 3 times 0 is 0, so I don't need to worry about the rest of those digits. When I move on to multiply by the 2, that 2 is a place over. So I'm going to put my placeholder 0 there in the next line of my answer. 2 times 6 is 12, so 2 carry 1. 2 times 5 is 10, plus 1 is 11, or 1 carry 1. 2 times 4 is 8, plus 1 is 9. And to finish up, we need to add up those two lines of our answer. So 8 plus 0, 6 plus 2, 3 plus 1, 1 plus 9 is 10. Last thing to do is adjust for our decimal. We have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits behind the dot in our factors. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 digits are going to be behind the dot in our answer. We can say our question mark is equal to 0.10488. And therefore the answer to our question, rounded to the nearest tenth, is 0.1 is 4.56% of 2.3. Obviously, it's really 0.10488, but rounded to the nearest tenth, this is our answer. Now, if we just think for a second, does this make sense? Well, I know that 10% of 2.3 is 0.23. Half of that would be 5%, so half of 0.23 is going to be 0.115. So 0.1 seems like a pretty close number to 0.11. And so my guess here is seeming like it makes sense. If you forget the divide by 100, for example, you'll get 10.48, and obviously 5% of 2.3 can't be 10. 5% of a number should be much smaller than the number itself. 10 is not much smaller than 2.3. When we look at a type 2, this is where we're trying to figure out the percent itself. So we know the two numbers, and we want to know what relationship is there in terms of percent between those two numbers. We're going to start off the same way by translating. 13 is a number. Is translates into equal sign. What translates into equal sign? Now, percent, the word, serves the same role as the symbol, and it means out of 100. And that out of 100 is always attached to the thing in front of it. So our what percent is question mark out of 100. Of means multiply, and 14 is a number, so it's just 14. Now again, we want to ask ourselves, is our question mark isolated? And in this case, it is not. This question mark here has a bunch of other stuff with it on the right side of the equal sign. And so we are going to, in this case, need to solve or undo what is being done to it. So let's first off look at this dividing by 100. We want to ask ourselves, how do we undo dividing by 100? And the opposite of dividing is multiplying. So we're going to multiply this side of the equation by 100. Now remember, whatever I do to the right side of the equation or the wall, I have to do to the left side as well. So let's think about what we get there. 13 times 100 is 1300. Then we have our wall, or our equal sign. On the other side of the wall, dividing by 100 and multiplying by 100 are opposites. They cancel each other out. So I'm left with my question mark and my times 14, which I haven't touched or done anything to yet. Now I do need to undo that times 14 in my next step. And so I ask myself again, what is the opposite of multiplying by 14? And well, the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we'll divide that right side by 14. Whatever I do to the right side of the wall, I do to the left side as well. Multiplying and dividing 14 cancel each other out. So we'll X those out. And we're going to need to actually do the division 1300 divided by 14. Just to give myself some space to do that, I'm going to move this over here in this note. And let's go ahead and divide. We want to divide our 1300 by 14. So when I do this, I'm going to ask myself, 14 goes into 1, well, 0 times. 14 goes into 13, well, 0 times as well. If I only have 13 items, I can't make a full group of 14. So I need to ask myself, how many times does 14 go into 130? And I can use a list of multiples to help me figure out how many times that is. So 14 plus 14 gives me 28 as 14 times 2. If I add another 14 after that, 8 plus 4 is 12, so 42. Plus another 14 after that is 56. Plus another 14 after that is 70. Plus another 14 after that is 94. Plus another 14 after that. Oops, something's gone wrong somewhere. Whoops, it was not 70 plus 14, 84. Plus another 14 is 98. Plus another 14 after that is 112. Plus another 14 after that is 126. And if I go 14 beyond that, that's obviously going to be greater than 130. So how many factors of 14 or multiples of 14? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times our 14 goes into 130. And then from there, I want to go ahead and say 14 times 9 is 126. Taking away leaves me with a 4, bring down the 0. 14 goes into 40, 2 times, which would make 28. Taking away leaves me with 12 and another 0. And then 8 times would get me to 112. And that would leave me with 8. Now obviously this division keeps going, but we have already got to the 10th place, which is all we're asked to round to here. So I can say, okay, well my decimal that I get from this division is 92.8, rounded to the nearest 10th, and that will be equal to my question mark. And so I can conclude that 13 is 92.8% of 14. Is that the easiest long division to do? No, but we can solve it out using our skills that we know. Move that 8 over as well there. Okay, the last type is where they tell us a percent and they tell us what the result of the percent is, but we don't know what number we were starting with. And so here we're going to go ahead and say, well, 1.2 is a number, so it's 1.2. Percent means out of 100. Of means multiply. What means question mark. Is means equals. And 48 is a number, so just 48. Again, when we ask ourselves, is our question mark isolated? It is not. There is other stuff, namely this, on the same side as the wall. So we are going to have to solve here by undoing. I'm going to start by taking this fraction and making it a bit easier to work with by converting it to a decimal. When I divide by 100, it moves my dot once, twice to the left. So I have really the decimal 0.012 in the place of that fraction. Now I'm going to try to solve, so I need to undo multiplying the question mark by 0.012. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So we'll divide the left side by 0.012, and we'll divide the right side by 0.012 as well. On the left side, multiplying and dividing by the same number cancels out, leaving us with just our question mark, and on the right side we have a calculation to complete. So I want to take my 48 and divide by 0.012. Now in grade 7 we learn about when we divide decimals, we're going to move our dot to make a whole number. So once, twice, 3 times would make the whole number 12. If I moved it 3 times in my divisor, I must move it 3 times in my dividend as well. So once, twice, 3 times to make 48,000. Now I'm going to divide. 12 goes into 4 0 times. 12 goes into 48 4 times, which makes 48 exactly. Taking away leaves me with a 0. 12 goes into 0 0 times. 12 goes into the next 0 0 times. 12 goes into the final 0 0 times. And I can say the result of this division is 4,000. And that tells me that 1.2% of 4,000 is 48. Now with all of these, we can use benchmarks to assist ourselves. The first question could be solved using benchmarks, 4 1%, a 0.5%, and a 0.05%. That might be a bit tricky, but you could do it. Here we talked about, using benchmarks to think, well, 14 is 100% of 14. So 13 should be pretty close to 100% of 14. So 92.8 sounds about right. And then in our last one here, we could use benchmarks to actually do 1.2% of 4,000 and figure out that that does indeed give us 48. And so that checks out with the original question. Now those were just basic ones where we just have an equation given to us and we want to solve it out. The next layer of complexity is to have a word problem. And of course we have examples of type 1, 2, and 3 word problems. Now in these ones, you usually want to start by finding the simple sentence in the question, or in a little bit harder question, writing a simple sentence using those equation words, is, of, and percent. So when I look at my type 1 example, I have right here my nice simple sentence. 14% of a cake is sugar. Next thing I want to do is look for information I can fill in. So they tell me that my cake itself is the number 200. So I can replace that cake with the idea of 200, and now I have an equation that I can solve. I want 14% of 200, and they're asking me how many grams is sugar. So let's go ahead and convert this to an equation itself. So 14 is a number, percent means out of 100, that means multiply, 200 is 200, a number, is translates into equals, and I've got my unknown sugar. My unknown is isolated. It's the only thing to the right side of the equal sign. So I'm just going to calculate the other side. We'll start by calculating the fraction. 14 divided by 100 is 0.14. And then we need to multiply that by 200 over here. You can, of course, long multiply that out if you need to. So we'll go 200 and 0.14. 4 times 0, 4 times 0, 4 times 2. Placeholder 0, 1 times 0, 1 times 0. Oops, those are zeros. And 1 times 2. Add, you get 0028. 2 digits of dots, 2 digits of dots. And we can say that 28 is equal to our question mark. And so we'll say there are 28 grams of sugar in the cake. Oops, in the cake. Now let's tidy that up a bit. In a type 2 problem, we are going to be needing to divide to figure out the percent. And so when we look at this question, an SB student is required to complete 20 volunteer hours. Sarah has completed 75 hours. We're asked what percent of the requirements has Sarah done? And so our has here is kind of a synonym for is. We would say some percent of the requirements is the amount that Sarah has done. And that's going to be our main simple sentence here. And we can fill into that our numbers. So we know that we're required to do 20. So what percent of 20? And we know that Sarah has done 75. So we can replace Sarah with 75. And let's write out our simple sentence. What percent of 20, the requirements, is 75. And so now let's translate that into an equation. We got our question mark for what, percent is out of 100, of is multiply, 20 is a number, so just 20, is translates into equals, and 75 is a number, so just 75. Again, our question mark is not by itself on the left side of the equal sign, so we're going to undo the things that are being done to it. I'm going to start this time by undoing the multiply by 20. The opposite of multiplying by 20 is dividing, and what I do to the left side of the equal sign, I need to do to the right side as well. Multiplying and dividing by 20 on that side cancel, leaving me with my question mark out of 100. On the other side, 75 divided by 20 is the fraction 75 out of 20. Now I'm going to simplify that fraction to make my life a little bit easier here. I notice both those numbers can divide by 5, so that's going to be question mark out of 100 is 5 goes into 7 one time, leaving us with 25, and 5 goes into 25 5 times, and then 20 divided by 5 is 4. Okay. Last thing to undo is the division by 100. So I'll multiply both sides by 100 to undo that. I get question mark is equal to 1500 out of 4. And that's something that we can long divide. So let's go ahead and do that. 4 goes into 1 0 times. 4 goes into 15 3 times, which creates 12. Taking away leaves us with 30. 4 goes into 37 times, creating 28, leaving us with 20. And 4 goes into 25 times. So I can say that question mark is equal to 20. 375 is our answer up here. And so our answer to the question would be that Sarah, let's write it up here, has completed 375% of the required hours. And then finishing up with a type 3, a marshal tells Sam that he has completed 16% of the race. So what Marshall has run is 16% of the race. And so let's fill it in. The amount that he has run is 1.2 kilometers. So we can fill that in. 1.2 means equals 16% of his times. And they're asking us how long is the race, which is what we don't know. Because our question mark is not isolated on the right side, there's also this stuff here we're going to need to solve. I'm going to start solving by taking this fraction and writing it as a decimal. So 16 out of 100 is 0.16. Oops, that's a question mark. And now I have to ask myself, what's the opposite of multiplying by 0.16? And the opposite of multiplying is dividing. We'll do that to both sides of our equal sign there. So we need to do the long division. 1.2 divided by 0.16. Just don't know what happened there. In order to do this division, we're going to move our dot twice in our divisor to make the whole number 16. And then that means we have to move it twice in our dividend to make the number 120. So 16 goes into 1 0 times. 16 goes into 12, 0 times. And now we have to think about 16 into 120. So similar to we did earlier, if we're not sure about our multiples of 16, let's just list them out. 16 plus 16 is 32, plus another 32 would be 64, plus another 32 would be 96, plus another 16, let's do, is 2, carry 1, 112, which is close to 120. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times that 16 went into 120, and 7 times 16 is 112. Now we know that 120 is really 120.00, as many zeros as we need, so we'll bring down the next zero, and I'll say 16 goes into 80 how many times? So from 64, if we added just 16, that would give us one more time to make 80 exactly, and that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times to go into 80. And that would give us 80 exactly. leaving us with 0. And so we can say 7.5 is equal to our question mark, and we'll say the race is 7.5 kilometers long. Again, we could use our mental math to check this out in terms of figuring out is 16% of 7.5 equivalent to 1.2 kilometers, and you should find that it is. So I hope that helps you with this idea of setting up an equation to solve a problem. Of course, our type 1 equations are grade 7. We were always multiplying in grade 7. In grade 8, we have those other two, are type 2 and type 3, where we do need to divide because we're solving our equation. Our unknown is not by itself. So I hope that's helped you with your equation setup in the percents unit.